Hello, and thanks everyone for joining the Digital BC live stream. For those of us joining for the first time, welcome. My name is Jen Lambert, and I am the Chief Digital Officer for the province of BC. And every month we host a conversation about all things digital with guests from around the world and right here at home in BC. Today, speaking of home, I am joining you today from beautiful Victoria, British Columbia, where I'm grateful to work and live on the traditional and unceded territories of the Lekwungen and Wasandik peoples, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. This session is being recorded and posted online for an internal and external audience. And you can turn on live captions at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And as you can see, we are using MS Teams Live, so please do ask questions and upvote the questions that you like. Your questions and comments are going to drive this conversation. And we will follow up with the podcast with any questions that we don't get to today. So without further ado, I'm excited to welcome Elle Waters to chat with me today. Elle has over 15 years of experience teaching teams the art of integrating accessibility practices into their Agile processes. And as the accessibility support leader for Adobe's digital experience products, Elle has been at the cutting edge of innovation. So welcome, Elle, and we're so happy to have you with us all the way from the Bay Area in California and joining us virtually. If you could tell us a bit about yourself, and then we'll get into questions.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And hello, Canada. Hello from America. I currently live in the Bay Area on unceded territory and land from the Ohlone tribe, and I am incredibly grateful to be here today. This was a really awesome sort of circumstance where I met someone from your team and we had really great conversations about accessibility and Agile, and most of the time those conversations don't find themselves in the same space. I've spent, as you mentioned, about 15 plus years or so focused as a profession on accessibility. I've always been really captivated by this idea of the public square where everyone has equity, everyone has the ability to be able to speak their truth and share and learn from each other. And so I kind of carried this into my professional career, seeing this merger, this combination of human rights and emerging technology. And I found it really fascinating. And there are lots and lots of problems that can be solved through inclusive design and Agile best practices. So it helps too. I don't know if this is part of my origin story or not, but it helps too that I'm married to an enterprise Agile coach. So when I say we do Agile as a couple, we do Agile pretty much because we're big believers in a lot of those best practices. So I scrum the sale of my house. We Kanban our kid into college, and I love seeing what accessibility and Agile can do for each other. So really excited to be a part of this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And I think what you said has really resonated in terms of we often speak about Agile and we often speak about accessibility, but we don't always speak about those things together. And that combination is super interesting. Can you tell us a little bit more about what inspired you to focus on the combination of those two things together?
Sure. I think that one of the things that I find valuable and interesting is that within every tech field, there are certain challenges and problems, and Agile really encourages you to break down problems into really identifying what's most valuable, how to prioritize the kind of solutions that you approach things with, and more than anything, and this is coming straight out of the manifesto, prioritizing people over process. So accessibility tends to get a bad reputation because we tend to come in and we say like, no news is good news. If I don't talk to you, it means there's no problems. And so it kind of makes this unusual antagonistic relationship for those of us who are trying to ensure that the digital content that you're building is accessible to people with disabilities. It by nature tends to focus on all the flaws or the barriers. And I think that sometimes that can drive it into a very technical, compliance-oriented solution. Whereas the more I started seeing, I worked in this digital consulting agency called Simply Accessible, a Canadian agency. I worked there for over 5 years, and our goal was to use all that we understood about Agile best practices to prioritize people over process within the field of accessibility. So really meaningful ways to be able to solve problems when you think about the human beings that we're trying to impact their lives for the better, and not viewing it only as a system or technical problem to be solved for. So I think that's probably one of the most realistic and valuable ways to apply Agile to accessibility, is to help with the mindset of compliance. And time again, we just saw one field teaching the other field. I'd love to share examples, but I could go on.
That's great. So it really sounds like it's an aspect of human-centered design, and it's sort of going deeper into human-centered design is to make sure that we're including accessibility. So we had a question that came in from the audience actually before the session started, and that was from someone named Bessire from our Water, Lands, and Resource Stewardship Ministry. And she asked, accessibility should be woven into every phase of development. So how should this be emphasized in a communications plan, both an internal and an external communications plan? So you talked a little bit about how it's incorporated into human-centered design. How about communications planning?
Yeah, I think it's important, given that one of the tenets of Agile is that you kind of have to recognize at the beginning of any kind of initiative or piece of work, you know the least about that work and how it will all unfold, and what the granular definition of success is for that. You have some high-level ideas. And within the field of accessibility, because we are talking about human rights, we are talking about access and very clear, profound needs for someone to be able to, say, complete a transaction or to get the information that they need with as little barrier as possible. There's a great deal of anxiety around accessibility, and people are worried. There's also legislative impacts, potentially punitive impacts. And so when you think about that at the beginning of the journey for accessibility, most people are about as nervous as they're ever going to be with the least amount of information they could possibly have. And so within a communication strategy, I think one of the first things to do is to really establish that this is about partnership with each other and with people with disabilities, and that this is a journey. So instead of looking at, and this is a very waterfall mindset, right? Instead of saying, it is a binary, either we're 100% accessible in everything that we do, or we have failed our constituents and it's utter and abject failure. Agile teaches you about really recognizing, prioritizing those pieces that you do know and where your planning goes. So I think in an internal communication strategy, you want to set people's minds at ease to know that we're going to do this together, and that we're going to have some areas where we may look back and say we could have done it differently, but that we're going to be able to succeed with this. The communication strategy, when it gets into execution, obviously needs to be much more tactically focused, thinking about how to be efficient. I'm going to say something that no one really likes to hear, but is absolute truth. For accessibility, you should do as little work as possible for the most value possible. And no one in accessibility would say that. They would assume that you're looking at doing everything all the time, all at once, kind of like, you know, the movie that came out, just basically everything all the time, 100%. When if you want to be efficient with Agile and you really want to think about how to integrate Agile into your accessibility planning and communication, you want to think about what are those important pieces in each phase of this life cycle, and how do we prioritize those? So I would say the communication strategy in the beginning of any kind of endeavor is really, really important, because you want people to have a sense of confidence. You want them to know foundationally what you already know, Maybe you have a design system that you're planning on investing your efforts in first. Well, that's obviously going to be something that won't really play out as an outcome of accessibility for a little while, but it's really valuable, important work. So that communication strategy internally is about focusing on the priorities and giving people the understanding that it's okay. Failure is a learning opportunity, and that people don't have to be experts straight out of the gate. Externally, I know a lot of people get nervous about being able to share what work they're doing in accessibility for all the reasons we talked about. Organizations are worried about a demonstration that doesn't show enough of a commitment, that kind of thing. But most individuals with disabilities, they're not a monolith, but most of them really want to understand that there's a commitment that they can trust in, that someone is really going to continually improve. And again, that sounds like an Agile term because it is continuous improvement. So I think that externally, the focus should probably be on the roadmap and about that commitment. And so really reinforcing, here's where we're planning on going. So internally, we've galvanized everyone. Everyone feels comfortable what their role is and how we will all learn as we go. Within the sort of operational phase, very tactical, think in terms of efficiency. And at the end, really share what your vision and your roadmap is, because your constituents and the members and users who benefit from your services are the ones who will hold you accountable to that. So it's a good thing to do, to communicate externally where you're headed, because it's, again, a partnership, and you want to be able to have that level of transparency when you share that information.
That's great. That really brought to life how Agile and working iteratively and starting small really aligns to the work needed for accessibility. That's great. We have another great question from the audience here. We have someone asking, they have ADHD and often struggle to manage JIRA tickets and break them down into small bits to be able to get started on them and be productive. And also struggle asking for help. How can this person's product owner or Scrum Master effectively support them?
So if I understand the question, we're looking at being able to work in a day-to-day environment as someone who has a disability, and neurodivergent variations in the way that we think, the way that we consume information, and the way that we work. I will say that I don't think the workforce has caught up globally yet. I think that one of these strange silver linings to a global pandemic, where it forced everyone to rethink how they work, it also forced them to think about really prioritizing what's most valuable. Some of that played out in, people thinking about investing in their home lives and thinking about not commuting. But another way that it manifested is seeing the way that people started really ruthlessly prioritizing their work. And while that might have seemed like a temporary state, it's actually a fantastic practice. So I think if someone was working through the challenges of being in a very neurotypical environment, and they needed to be able to break down JIRA stories so that just it works better for the way that their mind consumes that information. I would say that, again, this is going to sound like a broken record, but that Agile best practices really share the value about thinking about what matters most. So there was a phrase a long time ago, maybe even pre-Agile, that talked about critical path management. So I think it's a really good idea to consider what absolutely must happen. And so if you're looking at, say, a JIRA epic, and you know that it's all about, for example, ensuring that the application can support up to a 400% magnification. If I were breaking that down into something that is achievable, because that is a massive, almost like a redesign of an application. If it's not a responsive website, if you're trying to meet that one success criterion, you can find yourself in this sort of never-ending cycle of scope creep and understanding what gets impacted, because everything is shared. So what I would typically do is say, all right, I'm a user and I have low vision, and I zoom my screen in. What is the absolute bare minimum of what I have to have in order to be able to complete a task on this website. Usually you would be thinking about global navigation as an example, and it often works as kind of a container. So just as an example, I would pull that out saying, first things first, we need to think about what are those global elements, and then break it down from there and just, bite by bite, try and start working through those pieces. The second part of the question is a little bit harder to work through, as far as just personally how people who work through different ways of interacting at work and everything, and they happen to be neurodivergent. I think after this, I will share some resource links about how to be able to encourage what I would call like personal work plans or SOPs. And this extends to everybody, even if you consider yourself neurotypical. There are certain things that I absolutely love about how to work with people. There are other things that you will see me avoid all the time because I can't stand it. And I think it's really good to have those open conversations. And again, once, individuals who are neurodivergent pave the way for that level of transparency, in that their needs are actually something that others may share as well, and they just didn't know to be able to share. I like working in a collaborative environment. I don't do well by myself, for example. I think we're getting to an age, especially with the Gen Z population entering the workforce, where we're going to get really tailored and understanding about how people work best, and I think we can look forward to that. But I'll share some links on just ways of working as a neurodivergent individual in the workforce these days, maybe some tips on how to manage that.
That would be great to get those resources. I think one of the things you just spoke about was making sure that we're making space for diversity in how people work in the workplace. And of course, we have a long journey to go there, but so I think we can get so much value out of that. So that's great. It'll be great to get those links. Yeah. Okay, another question has come in. This is around, how do we win trust by starting, even if it is not good enough at the start, not meeting expectations? How do we win trust and show that we are committed to continuous learning, slowly but surely?
Fantastic question. I know a lot of people respond with, that's a good question, but I truly mean it. It's a great question. Trust is a huge indicator for an individual's relationship with an entity. So in the same way that we have to have a certain minimum level of trust with a doctor to take their advice and act on it, people sometimes overlook the fact that there is a relationship between an organization, like a government institution, and the people that they serve. There is definitely a relationship there. And there's been a lot of research. Again, I do have links to share for this because we did some research on this last year. A lot of research around what are the factors that make up a trusting relationship. And it's actually not perfection. There's been some interesting research that shows in ratings and reviews for e-commerce websites that people don't trust perfect scores. If you have a 5-star review with 1,000 reviews, the average consumer assumes that some of that has been manipulated in some way. I don't know if we're just a pessimistic generation or if it's just the reality of the way the world works with commerce and capitalism, that we tend to not trust perfection. And they have shown that actually like a 4.5 out of 5 is actually tends to increase people's trust in a particular product or service. And so first I want to really establish that lack of perfection is not failure in the eyes of an individual, but the commitment for what you're going to do needs to be something that you know you can follow through on. So it's better to be aspirational on a high level, but when it comes to a concrete roadmap that you share with your constituents, follow through on that roadmap. That's really the thing. So if you don't follow through, being able to provide details. They found that transparency, especially in like manager and direct report relationships, that transparency actually ranks much higher than a sense of perfection. And so I would say lean towards authenticity and transparency. And one of the biggest indicators that an organization is taking accessibility seriously would be that they are partnering with people with disabilities. So that's either that they're hiring people with disabilities, which is ultimately the goal would be to have someone with disabilities in a position of leadership to help define a strategy for digital. That's really like sort of the target on the hill that we would all want. But short of that, having someone as a co-creator in that space so that it's kind of bringing back that phrase, nothing about us without us. You don't want to design for people with disabilities, you want to design with people with disabilities. So I think being able to share that journey from a humble position of knowing that we are all working towards a goal, I think is important, and celebrate those wins when you can, but just the transparency and authenticity and partnership, I would say, are really going to be the things that build that trust.
That's so great. And I think a lot of the things that you spoke about there in terms of the transparency and the commitment and making sure you're committing to things that you actually feel you can do really harkens back to that question around communications planning as well, and helps to answer that one too. Even more deeply. Okay, so we've got another question here. This question notes that many people who are neurodiverse don't know that they're neurodiverse because they are overlooked in the system. So how can Agile in particular ensure that these individuals are equitably included?
I think this is a great question. I've never had this question before. This is taking it to a whole different level that I love. And again, completely off the top of my head, I really love this question. I think one of the things I love most about Agile is, and this is for those of you who are really diehard SAFe fans, or you believe that lean is the only Agile path forward, I will gently remind you that Agile is a way of working. It is not a specific methodology. And because of that, it embraces diversity and it embraces different ways to accomplish the same thing. So it's actually really well positioned. If you think about Agile not as a specific kind of methodology, but the way that somebody might put together a request for tender, I think it's called in Canada, the idea that every kind of business or personal function. I made a joke about, selling my house and getting my kid into university. All of those things are examples that it doesn't matter what type of way that you work. It matters what your definition of done, like definition of ready and definition of done are. And if it is the best way to achieve that goal efficiently and also still prioritizing those valuable things like the goal of what you were trying to accomplish, the people involved in that process. So I think for a neurodivergent employee, Agile is the best way to work because it allows you to take the tools almost like a crayon box, and it's your decision how you're going to paint that picture, how you're going to draw that. And it encourages you to lean into the ways that make you the most productive or most efficient. So as far as how that plays out, I think it depends on individual preference and what works best. I know that, for example, in Jira, there's so many choices in the way to lay out information in Jira that it's almost a detriment to the application because you have 8,000 choices for how you want to build a project. But that actually probably leans into people being able to say, well, I like the detailed view. I prefer a list view. I look at it in a Kanban view, but all three of those views, and this is again, just looking at Jira, are different ways to see the same information. And I think I would look for those kinds of ways of working if I was neurodivergent, knowing that, like I said, you should feel totally empowered, that Agile really encourages that level of diversity.
That's great. So it being an open framework rather than a specific methodology just allows that space for diversity and equity. It's great.
And it's messy. People probably are less comfortable with it. There are many of us who we have to fight those instincts to want to put everything in a box in a predictable level. Agile tells you to embrace uncertainty. And so it's a constant little source of friction that is a healthy friction for us.
Mm-hmm. Healthy tension, nice.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. So this one is sort of speaking about, I think, what you were talking about at the outset around finding the smallest thing to do with the most value. So any given accessibility issue will only affect a relatively small percentage of the user base. And under Agile, this seems to kick a lot of accessibility issues to the back of the queue after a lot of bugs enhancements that benefit the majority of user base are resolved. And that's terrible. So how do we advocate for accessibility issues in this context?
So again, really legitimate question, because if we're always looking at the majority user needs, and we know that even depending on how you look at your statistics, that we are talking about anywhere from 10 to 25, 30% of a given population. With that said, I think we need to look at it a little bit deeper than just kind of this is for people with disabilities and this is for everyone else. Recognizing that disability is really a usability amplifier. So the idea is that which is problematic for someone finishing, say, a purchase path or completing a form, and maybe it might take them 5 minutes longer because it's a really poorly designed form, could be a complete blocker for someone with disabilities. The flip side of that is also true, meaning that if you solve for accessibility issues, you actually increase the usability for all of your users. And so in aggregate, we're talking about a much bigger impact that is much more about the systemic usability of your digital content, and that alone, even in the here and now, will benefit a lot of users. But accessibility also prioritizes code best practices, design best practices, because we're leaning on standards to make sure assistive technology all harmonizes with that. But by doing that, if you notice, every responsive site is also very well supported for users with low vision. It's the same concept that if you lay best practices and foundation as the foundation of your digital content, it actually yields faster fixes, new browser changes are easier to adapt to. And so it just has that sort of cascading benefit. So I would say widen the lens about who gets impacted by that.
It really has a multiplier effect as well. Mm-hmm.
Very much.
Okay, so we're nearing the end. I think we have room for one more question. This question that we got is really great. It's around team agreements. So when setting up a new product team or bringing in new members, really being clear and transparent about some of the things that others have asked about, including tools, accommodations, practices needed to complete tasks, work preferences, and work needs as well. So there's a question around how important that is and what can happen when that's ignored.
Well, I think that this is a mature question. A lot of organizations, the teams are still trying to understand acceptance criteria, or what is the definition of ready. A team agreement is a different level of Agile health and hygiene, and I think that that is essential to start considering how people work. If the goal is very objectively to produce the best content or code or deliverable you can without destroying the human beings who are trying to accomplish that work, and doing it with the most efficiency and the least amount of effort to produce the best outcome, then I think it really is essential to look at how people do their work. I love the idea, of looking at this through that lens of neurodiversity, just because that's where you'll see most of the different styles of work working. And I think, again, looking at what success looks like and having a really frank conversation about that, especially if you're thinking about putting accessibility into your team agreement. Like, for example, the definition of ready and done. Similarly, you want to say, not boil the ocean, we need all the things always, all the time accessible. I think it's better to focus on what matters most. And so in the same way with the way your team works, I think you hone it down to what are some essential things that we need to include to account for different ways of working, whether that be we prefer to have stand-ups in a chat format, and I could argue either side of that discussion, because our team is globally distributed and we want to make sure that people are not getting up at 2 a.m. to attend a live stand-up, for example. That's an example. That could be something that you feel like is the most important thing. I would say the Scrum lead, looking at what is causing the biggest friction or difficulty with a team, if it's an existing team, is a really good place to mine for how do we make this a better working environment, and creating that sense of trust so that people can be forthright and candid about what their personal preferences. I hate 8 a.m. meetings, and yet it's a necessary piece because I have team members in India, for example. And so working through those things just very openly in conversation, team agreement should always be, like user stories, the outcome of what you've already discussed as a team.
That's great. It really tied up a lot of the things that we were talking about earlier. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
So we've come to the end of the session, and thank you so much for taking the time to connect with us. I know that you're coming back virtually as well in December.
Yes.
To the Accessibility and Agile Communities of Practice. And as you can see, lots of us here have thought deeply about accessibility and Agile together. So these should be two more great sessions. So we're really looking forward to that. And we will send everyone on the call more information invites to these sessions, as well as the links that you talked about earlier. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the wonderful questions. And my husband, Agile coach, I'll be sharing these questions with him too, because they were so great. Thanks.
Thank you. All right.